This planet's empty, I see no signs of life. Please don't tell me that the human race did not survive. There are no people in the future. There are no people. There are no people in the future. No people at all. There are no people in the future. Where did all my people go? There are no people in the future. Let me try my people call. Where are all my people? Where are all my people? I guess I'll fly away.
Hey, everybody, welcome. Yes, indeed. It is Friday, May 5th. Happy Cinco de Mayo, everybody. And for all my colleagues out there at Kutztown University and the State System of Higher Education, happy end of the last week of classes. Yes, we still got finals week ahead, but it is the last week of classes, which means like, woo! And at the same time, the work goes nuts now, because now it's all the final grading and everything like that, but here we are. Welcome to Raging Chicken's Friday Politics Roundup. This is Kevin Mahoney, creator and founder of Raging Chicken. Each week, we break down the good, the bad, and the ugly in state and national politics. You can help support this show by becoming a patron for as little as $5 a month. Seriously, as little as $5 a month. Head on over to patreon.com/rcpress right now, today, right now. Why are you waiting? Just right now. You can also help out this show by heading over to our YouTube channel if you're not there already. Smash that subscribe button, like the stream for this show, and hit that notification bell so you'll know every time that we go live. And if you're one of our awesome podcast listeners, make sure to leave us that 5-star review on whatever platform you listen to. Leave a comment, let other folks know why you listen to the show. Little things like this, I cannot emphasize this so much. Little things like this help other people find the show, right? And join our little community here. It's really fantastic. Use your people call. My people call. There you go. Anyways, we cannot let Paul Martino, Moms for Liberty, and their oligarch friends buy our schools and push extremist politics in our community, everybody. Raging Chicken has teamed up with Levelfield to launch a truly community-rooted pack, there you go, to invest in organizing, supporting local and statewide progressive candidates, and unmasking the toxic organizations injecting our communities with right-wing extremism. We're putting small dollar donations to work to beat back the power of big money. You can get more information and drop your donation at ragingchicken.levelfield.net. Well, on today's show, 4 Proud Boys, including their leader, Enrique Tarrio, were convicted of seditious conspiracy for their involvement in the January 6th insurrection at the Capitol. That's big news. Well, the corruption doesn't stop when it comes to Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas. The reporting in the Washington Post this week exposed that Leonard Leo, the architect of the right-wing legal juggernaut, the Federalist Society, instructed Kellyanne Conway to use her nonprofit organization to pay Clarence Thomas's wife, Ginny Thomas, that right-wing conservative activist, to pay her tens of thousands of dollars. Then Leo told Conway, hey, I'm going to give you all this money. I'm going to make a donation to your nonprofit, which means Leonard Leo gets a tax write-off. I'm going to donate this money to your nonprofit, and you are going to pass that on to Ginny Thomas. However, leave her name off all the paperwork. Pretty crazy. Now, that reporting comes on the heels of revelations by ProPublica that billionaire Harlan Crow paid the private school tuition for Thomas's great-nephew, who Thomas was raising, quote, as a son. Thomas did not disclose the tuition payments as part of his legal obligations to do so. We're talking at least tens of thousands of dollars, right? Upwards of $150,000. No corruption there. Crazy. North Carolina becomes the latest state to try to further restrict abortion. The Republican majority passed a new 12-week abortion ban, but the state's Democratic governor, Roy Cooper, says he'll veto the legislation. Bernie Sanders unveils a new bill that calls for an increase of the federal minimum wage to $17 an hour. Meanwhile, in the ebb and flow of justice and injustice, Iowa becomes the latest state to roll back labor protections for children because we want to protect the children. now allowing for children as young as 14 to work in roofing, construction, demolition, light manufacturing, and even assisting customers with fireworks. How about that? 16 and 17-year-olds will also be able to use or serve alcohol in restaurants. Great. Because parents. The bill joins similar ones being passed in Arkansas and Missouri that are part of a push by conservative lobbying groups. Because it's all about the children. The labor market is going strong as unemployment declines to 3.4%, adding 253,000 jobs. Republican frontrunner from North Carolina governor was found to be, mocking school shooting survivors, and he even once justified shooting protesters. There's one stand-up guy. A little organization by calling itself the Freedom Foundation is holding a conference in Denver this July. And that conference, guess what it's going to do? It's going to train right-wing school board activists, anti-union teachers, and will, make sure everybody knows how to deliver a whitewashed curriculum. Free of CRT, LGBTQ, women probably, I'm sure. Insane. A little closer to home was a big week in Pennsylvania this week as PA House passed a bill that would add LGBTQ protections to the state's non-discrimination law. All right, this is a bill that it's been written 22 years ago, and then it finally got passed out of committee and then got voted through on the House floor. Right, now that goes to the state Senate, we're going to see there's actually some people saying this may go. And as I talked a little bit on the show on Monday, Moms for Liberty is holding their conference in Philadelphia this summer ahead of this year's school board and municipal elections. That's going to be something. And criticism of President of Thomas Jefferson Hospital, Mark Tykosinski. Well, those criticisms blew up this week, following revelations that he's had a habit of liking tweets that question the science behind COVID and called gender reassignment surgery child mutilation. He's like, I didn't know. I was liking it and I was just bookmarking it for later. I didn't know that. I didn't know what I was doing. That's his defense. Oh, and today's kind of last cultural call or whatever, the artificial intelligence pioneer, Geoffrey Hinton, well, he left Google to warn us about the potential dangers of rapidly deploying AI. When he was looking at AI, I think this is what he said.
I'm glad the end of the world's working out well for someone.
Yes, indeed. Crazy. Well, for more PA Progressive Talk, tune into the Rick Smith Show's live stream at 9 p.m. Eastern on his YouTube channel, Twitter, or Facebook. Subscribe to his podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Head on over to thericksmithshow.com for the latest across all his platforms. And you got to check out Sisters of the Night Caucus podcast if you haven't already. Amazing PA women stirring the political cauldron behind this podcast. Rock the house. And they know where the bodies are buried. Make sure to follow them on Twitter at The Night Caucus. That's at The Night Caucus on Twitter. And subscribe to their podcast on Anchor, Spotify, iTunes, or wherever you get your podcast. You haven't heard The Signal is a new podcast by the Bucks County Beacon. The Signal is hosted by the Beacon's editor-in-chief, Cyril Michaleko, and is produced by yours truly. Twice a month, The Signal will shine a light on right-wing extremist currents streaming through Bucks County and beyond. Cyril invites guests who can provide insight, analysis, and organizing solutions so that we can steer the community towards calmer, saner, progressive routes. New episode just dropped this past week. More on the school board craziness. You got to check it out. Head on over to buckscountybeacon.podbean.com to get it directly, or subscribe to the podcast wherever you get your podcast. Attention all you gamers out there. The Game Inn, with two N's, the Game Inn is a Quakertown-based black family-owned gaming store. They're friends of the show. They've got everything for retro N64s, the latest consoles, video games for all platforms, collectibles, action figures, Funko Pops, walls of Funko Pops, and kids get discounts with every A on the report card. Check them out on their Facebook page and follow them on Twitter at the Game Inn. That's with two N's. Got a question about a game, looking for something hard to get? Shoot them a message or drop them an email at thegameinpa@gmail.com. And a shout out goes to Jonathan Mann, who wrote our intro song, There Are No People in the Future. Check out all his great stuff on his YouTube page and follow him on Twitter at SongADayMan. That's with 2 N's, at SongADayMan on Twitter. We got some good shows coming up at Out to Coop Live. This coming Monday, May 8th, I welcome Mark Engler to the show. Mark is a Philly-based writer and author of This Is an Uprising, How Nonviolent Revolt is Shaping the 21st Century. He is also a member of the editorial board at Dissent magazine. We'll be talking about his latest article, Can Movements Keep Politicians from Inevitably Selling Out?, which appears in the most recent issue of Dissent, and you can check it out at The Forge and Waging Nonviolence as well. Then the following week, on May 15th, I welcome Christina Marusik back to the show. We're going to be talking about her brand new book, A New War on Cancer, The Unlikely Heroes Revolutionizing Prevention. Christina is an award-winning Pittsburgh-based journalist who covers environmental health and justice for Environmental Health News. You remember that we had her back on the show back in 2021 talking about her investigative series Fractured, about the impact of fracking on people and their bodies in Southwest PA communities. Look, everybody, we want a progressive future. We need progressive media. Support Pull No Punches, homegrown progressive media today by becoming a patron of Raging Chicken for as little as $5 a month. Simply go to patreon.com/rcpress. We're here for the fight, and we need you. Become a patron for the price of a good beer once a month. Help keep the media in the movement, and the movement in the media. Become a patron for as little as $5 a month. Head on over to patreon.com/rcpress today. Well, how's everybody doing? I don't know about you, but in my neck of the woods, it looks like the rain is beginning to find its way out into the Atlantic, finally. We got some sunny weather today for the first time in a while, although it is like unexpectedly cold in my house this morning, especially in my little basement area that I'm coming to you at today. So I've got like layers on, blankets around here. I've already had a full day. I already had a doctor's appointment at 8 o'clock this morning. Already been out and about, up at 5, getting the kids' lunches ready, go to the doctor's appointment, come back, and here I sit. And then when I get off here, yes, it is going to be grading time extraordinaire, as the end of my semester has come, and now it's a matter of grading papers. Right? Some good stuff this year. I'm very psyched. So let's just jump into it. The big news that we had 4 members of the Proud Boys, including Enrique Tarrio, were convicted on Thursday. Right? They were convicted of seditious conspiracy regarding their role in plotting the insurrection on January 6th. Right? Now this is was the final of 3 cases, right, that led to 3 sedition cases that federal prosecutors had brought against key figures in the Capitol attack. And that's a big deal. Seditious conspiracy, charges are not easy to prove. You have to have some pretty solid evidence, and they did. So what was interesting about the case of Enrique Tarrio is that basically it's kind of signaled in a certain way that they're willing to go after the planners of the coup, right? Of the coup attempt, I should say, right? Because Enrique Tarrio was actually not in D.C. At the Capitol at the time of the January 6th insurrection. But what this showed is that, no, they recognized that his role in planning it logistically, strategizing, and so on, and he was convicted on that charge. I'm sure this is not the last that we're going to hear about this, but that was a fairly decent big deal that we just saw. So that's a good thing, I think. The other thing is just, man, I'll tell you, this Clarence Thomas is something else. I'll tell you. This is the kind of thing where, if there were folks out there who were still like, yeah, the Supreme Court, they have some problems, but there's still a legitimate thing like this. I mean, it's getting harder and harder to really support the legitimacy of the Supreme Court, this particular version of it. And, there was a really good show on the Majority Report this past Wednesday with Ian Millhiser. Ian Millhiser, I've talked about him on the show before. I think he's a phenomenal He's like one of the Supreme Court people I go to on the Supreme Court to read the Supreme Court to understand not just what's at stake in particular Supreme Court cases, but also understand the history of the court. He wrote a book. I want to say it was, oh my God, suddenly start yawning like crazy. I believe it was 2015, called Injustices, which it was one of those books that kind of, disabused me of any kind of rosy picture I had in my head of the Supreme Court. And I first remember hearing about it actually on the Rick Smith show, because Ian Millhiser would come on the Rick Smith show over the years. And I remember when his book was first coming out, him talking about the perceptions of the Supreme Court, in particular among kind of at then mainstream American history or progressives and the views of progressives and stuff. And it was a view that I had grown up with, right? The idea that the Supreme Court was a force of good, right? That it kind of, overturned segregation. It did, you had civil rights legislation, and it was upholding these things, and it was kind of striking down discrimination. So, and so when I was coming up as a kid and learning that, there was that feeling the Supreme Court was a guardian of justice, right? That helped support that, the MLK's famous thing, the arc of history is long but bends towards justice, right? As long as there's people tugging on it, and that Supreme Court was one of those forces. However, Ian Millhiser, in Injustices, and when he had his appearances of the Rick Smith show back in 2015 and before, basically it told a different history, right? Said actually that was an aberration in the history of the Supreme Court. Matter of fact, most of the time, most of the history of the Supreme Court has been one of backlash, right, and protecting the rights of the privileged, not of the people. And so that's a really fascinating one. So, anyways, he was on the Majority Report this week, and really just basically saying, like, I don't know what you do, like how you talk about a legitimate Supreme Court here, especially when he said that, look, the Supreme Court has always been a political entity, and that's one thing, right? And there's problems with that. He says, but this is the first time in kind of our lifetimes, at least, where the Supreme Court has become a strictly partisan court. Right. So there's no, if somebody is, if you have Republicans and Democrats on the court, right? So, and what Ian Millhiser said, like, if that's going to be the case, if it is going to be a purely partisan thing, what's the purpose of it? We already have a partisan legislature, right? We already have representative democracy there. The only difference between what we have in the legislature and Congress versus what we have in the Supreme Court is that the Supreme Court, the justices are not accountable through democratic means, right? You can't recall them. So, these revelations about, what's happening with Clarence Thomas right now are pretty nuts. Like, if you look at this, like, so for example, Leonard Leo, as we've talked about on the show quite a bit. If you recall, when Alyssa Bowen is on the show, we're frequently basically tracking, or she, I should say, her research and her organization, True North Research, are tracking, the influence of people like Leonard Leo. He's the founder, one of the key people, the founders of the Federalist Society. He is the key architect of the plan to basically control the Supreme Court by basically grooming right-wing justices into this particular mindset, so that they carry out this what appears to be a consistent judicial strategy, but which is a highly ideological one that Leonard Leo has helped ushering in. Well, so we've been talking about him, and so Leonard Leo, he has been paying, say, tens of thousands of dollars to Clarence Thomas's wife, Ginny Thomas, through these networks of nonprofits, right? So I'll read you this part from the Washington Post. So in January 2012, Leo instructed the GOP pollster Kellyanne Conway to bill a nonprofit group he advises and use that money to pay Virginia Ginny Thomas, the documents show, right? So actually, I got that backwards. I think I'm sorry. I think I misspoke then in the intro, right? It wasn't Kellyanne Conway's nonprofit, right? It was his nonprofit. My bad. So to bill a nonprofit group he advises and use that money to pay Ginny Thomas, and these are in documents that have been reviewed by the Washington Post. That same year, the nonprofit, the Judicial Education Project, filed a brief before the Supreme Court in a high-mark voting rights case. So this is the deal, right? This is where this is kind of, the corruption. So this is 2012. The Judicial Education Project filed a brief to the Supreme Court in this landmark voting rights case, which basically ended or rolled back voting rights in this country significantly. And $25,000 was paid by one of the groups filing that brief, Judicial Education Project, which was one of the groups that Leonard Leo advises, given to Ginny Thomas, right? In that time, of course, the wife of the Supreme Court Justice. Now, Leo, a key figure in a network of nonprofits that has worked to support nominations of conservative justice, told Conway that he wanted to give Ginny Thomas, quote, another $25,000, unquote, the documents show. He emphasized that the paperwork should, quote, no mention of Ginny, of course, unquote. Conway's firm, the polling company, sent the Judicial Education Project a $25,000 bill that day. Per Leo's instructions, it listed the purpose as, quote, supplement for Constitution polling and opinion consulting, unquote, the documents show. In all, according to the documents, the polling company paid Thomas's firm, Liberty Consulting, $80,000 between June 2011 and June 2012, and expected to pay $20,000 more before the end of 2012. The documents reviewed by the Post do not indicate the precise nature of any work Thomas did for the Judicial Education Project or the polling company. The arrangements reveal that Leo, longtime Federal Society leader and friend to the Thomases, has functioned not only as an ideological ally of Clarence Thomas's, but has also worked to provide financial remuneration to his family. And it shows Leo arranging for the money to be drawn from a nonprofit that soon would have an interest before the court, right? I mean, that is every reason in the world why you do not want these kind of relationships, right? And any of this kind of stuff should have been reported. Of course, it has not been, right? So now we see a little bit behind the curtain of what's going on, right? And then we saw, right, in ProPublica, we found out that, Clarence Thomas, has been, I should say, ProPublica has been reporting for a while now about Clarence Thomas's relationship with Harlan Crow. They've been kind of breaking all these stories that shows Harlan Crow, who's this billionaire, has got a really cozy relationship with Clarence Thomas, like paying for his vacations, paying for his private jet flights, and all this other kinds of stuff. All things that Clarence Thomas is supposed to report as part of financial disclosures of potential conflicts of interest, right? And of course, Clarence Thomas has not reported them, or he's only reported a few of them, right? It's very unclear as all the reporting, and nobody seems to have an answer for why he would report this one, but not all these other ones, right? I think that, common sense dictates that he's not reporting all the other ones, because if he showed like all the money that he's receiving and all the gifts that he's receiving, then that would clearly send up flares that this is corruption, right? Well, this latest one was a doozy, right? I read a little bit from ProPublica here. In 2008, Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas decided to send his teenage grandnephew to Hidden Lake Academy, a private boarding school in the foothills of northern Georgia. The boy, Mark Martin, was far from home. For the previous decade, he had lived with the justice and his wife in the suburbs of Washington, D.C. Thomas had taken legal custody of Martin when he was 6 years old and had recently told an interview that he was, quote, raising him like a son. Tuition at the boarding school ran more than $6,000 a month. But Thomas did not cover the bill. A bank statement from the school from July 2009, buried in unrelated court filings, shows the source of Martin's tuition payment for that month, the company of billionaire real estate magnate Harlan Crow. The payments extended beyond that month, according to Christopher Grimwood, a former administrator at the school. Crow paid Martin's tuition the entire time he was a student there, which was about a year, Grim told ProPublica. Quote, Harlan picked up the tab, unquote, said Grimwood, who had got to know Crow and the Thomases and had access to school financial information through his work as an administrator. Thomas did not report the tuition payments from Crow on his annual financial disclosures, and several years earlier, Thomas disclosed a gift of $5,000 for Martin's education from another friend. It is not clear why he reported that payment but not Crow's. The tuition payments add to the picture of how the Republican mega donor has helped fund the lives of Thomas and his family. Right? So this is, not only do we have like Clarence Thomas basically setting the table for the destruction of the 20th century in there. Because you remember, Clarence Thomas is the one who wrote that dissent when they were overturning Roe v. Wade. That was basically was one of the people who got behind the dissent, I should say, about saying, look, we don't, no reason we should stop with Roe. There's all these other implications. There's all these other kind of cases that aren't in the Constitution that we should really kind of be thinking about. Right? And so you've got this billionaire dude, right, who is just funneling the Thomas's money, right? And you've got Leonard Leo, who's a right-wing kind of legal activist, right, who is, marshaling the funds behind the Federalist Society and leading its ideological project to kind of overturn, actually the Supreme Court decisions of the 20th century, really. How do you allow that to stand? Now we also saw Neil Gorsuch, of course. We find that, he had this, parcel of land, it's real estate that, wasn't moving, wasn't going anywhere. And then he becomes Supreme Court justice and boom, he was able to sell it for $1 million plus, right? So as these revelations come forward, right, especially from all these conservative justices, it becomes increasingly more difficult to see the court as anything but partisan hackery and a grift. And, in my humble opinion, that is not what we need. That is not what we need. Crazy. What else we got too? So we saw new news coming out of North Carolina this week that the Republican-dominated legislature in North Carolina had voted through another abortion restriction. This time it was for a 12-week abortion ban. Now, North Carolina's Democratic governor, Roy Cooper, says he's going to veto the legislation. And he's doing this interesting thing, too, as well. He's not just kind of vetoing it immediately, right? He's basically holding it for the moment. And as I was reading about this, the strategy there is that he doesn't want it to kind of just like disappear for the news cycle. He wants it now, because, this thing was, I want to say it was, let me see what it says. Had only been introduced like a few days, I want to say, before. Yeah, 2 days, right? So it says GOP lawmakers barreled a bill through the state legislature to ban most abortions after 12 weeks of pregnancy, less than 48 hours after unveiling their proposal. This is in the Washington Post. So they have, so they basically put this proposal out for the ban, right? Rushed to pass it through. Right, where nobody really, even like journalists and the media and the public certainly hadn't had a chance to really see what was in this bill. And Cooper is basically said, no, I'm not just going to just like veto it right away. We're going to talk about this. We're going to talk about this publicly. We're going to let people know about what's actually happening here, what was in this bill that they just passed, right, before I veto it. Right, it's a way of kind of like, drawing, or turning some attention onto what their strategies, what their tactics are. So this is really interesting. This is why I wanted to flag this here today. So even though this looks like it's going to be vetoed, right? Here's the political battle yet to come, according to the Post. The bill passed the state Senate yesterday, setting up a showdown with Democratic Governor Roy Cooper, who vowed in an interview with Caroline, one of the players, to veto the measure with a delay of up to 10 days so that the public could, quote, digest this very complicated, burdensome legislation that they haven't had a chance to even see, unquote. And he's aiming to peel away moderates in order to thwart Republicans' veto-proof majorities in both chambers. So the idea is you spend some time talking about this publicly, allow the public to really understand what's in this and what it can do, and then all those Republicans who would be part of the veto-proof majorities in the chambers, and both in the House and the state Senate there, that those quote-unquote moderate Republicans are ones who said that they are behind a women's right to choose. They are going to feel the pressure, right? They can't just kind of like vote along with their party, right, to overdo this to set themselves up for election. No, they have to face their constituents to basically answer that question, right? Answer the questions about, are you going to vote for this bill? Are you going to strip these rights away? So that's going to be interesting. So here's the part. What happens in North Carolina could have repercussions nationwide. The 12-week abortion limit, which is less restrictive than the near total ban in effect in many GOP-led states, allows over 90% of abortions to continue. This is what's interesting about it. North Carolina Republicans say that was in response to the political backlash to restrictions seen across the country, and they hope the measure they're framing as a quote-unquote mainstream alternative will become a model for the rest of the country. So they're trying to play the reasonable track here, right? But nonetheless, right, this is a restriction. This is a further restriction. This is a kind of winding it down. But notice a couple things in there. This is why it's interesting. We say they weren't going to follow along with the rest of the nut job Republicans in other states who are passing these like 6-week abortion bans, because they recognize that there's a backlash and that puts them in political jeopardy. So here you go. So they're going to try to do this moderate thing. So to try to appease their base, right? Appease the kind of the rabid Republican base, while kind of playing to a kind of moderate center. This is why what the Governor Roy Cooper is doing is actually a really cool strategy, because it's going to basically put the pressure upon those people, say, no, you don't get this kind of wiggle room. You are voting for abortion restrictions, period, right? So there we go. So that's happened in North Carolina. In other good news, Bernie Sanders unveils a bill for $17 an hour as a federal minimum wage, right? That's a good news. This is in the Pennsylvania Capital Star. There's an article in there. So U.S. Senator Bernie Sanders announced on Thursday that Democrats plan to mark up legislation to increase the federal minimum wage, $17 an hour, pointing to an increase in the cost of living. Outside the U.S. Capitol, Sanders, a Vermont independent and chairman of the Health and Education, Labor and Pensions Committee, said the panel will vote June 14th on a bill that would increase the federal minimum wage of $7.25 an hour, which is what it is now, to $17 an hour over a 5-year period. That goal is a $2 an hour increase over labor organizers' past campaign of Fight for 15, because guess what? A lot of time has passed since that Fight for 15 campaign started, right? It's great to see Sanders putting this on the floor. And again, this is one of these examples of this is a fight worth fighting, right? Something that Democrats have, shied away from, say, well, we don't think it's going to pass the Senate, that maybe we shouldn't even propose it. No, this is a way of driving your commitments, right, into the media, but also more importantly, to basically show who's standing in the way, right? So that's good. So now pendulum goes back again. In Iowa, latest state to roll back labor protections for children. Right? Children as young as 14 can now work in roofing, construction, demolition, light manufacturing, and assisting customers with fireworks and so on. Right? 16 and 17-year-olds can now serve alcohol. Right? Now, of course, all of this is, with parental permission, of course. Right? But with parental permission, this is like, what are you talking about? Right? Do these people have any idea of what it took, right? The fights that it took. And it's interesting, you know, I'm reading this book. I got to pull up the title of it now. I think it's called. Oh wait, actually, I have it right here. Except, actually, I should say I'm listening to the book. It's one of the books I listen to on my commute. I think it's called Before the Storm, right? But let me just double. Yep, Before the Storm. Before the Storm by Rick Perlstein, and it's the first of a series of books from Rick Perlstein. The next one focuses on Nixon Land, I think it's what it's called, is focusing on that kind of Nixon era. So this is actually the one focusing on the Goldwater era, and then there's the Nixon era, and then there's the Reagan era. And it's like the story of the development of kind of, say, right-wing conservative politics over this period of time. And it's really fascinating. It's a really good read. It's the kind of thing that's, puts in perspective how long that this movement has been working. One of the things that was interesting is that in one of the chapters, Perlstein, talks about and writes about some of the history of these really kind of right-wing powerhouses, and they're all associated with, major manufacturers, major industries. They're all kind of, the capitalists who don't want anybody touching anything of their money. They want to decide for themselves, right? They don't want their workers to have any rights, whatever. But they were also that a lot of these folks that were motivating and really pushing for and supporting Goldwater in that campaign, and who were establishing this kind of right-wing media network, reading this one part that's connected to the history of General Electric, they were vehemently against child labor laws, right? They thought, children should be made to work. They're also, as we've learned in recent episodes of The Signal, is the same people that were against public education, right? Because it would take children out of the workforce. And now we're living in an age where apparently there's been enough of historical amnesia of the atrocities that were kind of wrought upon the bodies of children through this industrial abuse of labor that they're willing to send them back to work. So there you go. Send those kids back up on the roof. Send those kids into the manufacturing plants. Yeah, let those kids sell fireworks. Put those kids, those underage kids, put those educated in bars and have them serve alcohol. Now, where you want your kid going? I was thinking a lot about this. I just it's been bugging me so much, right? And all the stuff about the parental rights. And look, I think it's time that we've got to say some very things pretty directly, right? Yeah, parents have the rights to do a lot of things, right? And parents do a lot of things. It's parental choice, right? There are parents out there, right? And let's just talk about this, right? There are parents out there who abuse their children. Should schools and workplaces and other parts of the community, should we respect that parent's right to abuse their kids? Or not? Or do we make sure that schools are safe places and that we teach those kids, right, that it is part of the culture of our schools, part of the culture of our institutions, that abuse is wrong, right? Seems right to me. Parents, religious right parents, have the right to believe that women have no place in the public, that they should be subservient to men. And those parents have the right, quote unquote, to raise their children in that way, to teach their sons that they can rightfully dominate women and to teach their daughters that they need to be submissive toward men. But our schools, should our schools just respect that and allow that boy that's raised in that family to demean and try to control other girls in the school because he is more than, and do we teach that girl who's being taught to be submissive that yes, that's right, that's her place because her parents say so? Or do our schools support a democratic society in which every individual is valued and equal? And no one, whether it's because of the color of their skin, whether it's because of their gender, whether it's because of their role in society or how much money they have, no one gets to dominate someone else. Right? Parents, and I know there's parents out there, quite a few parents actually, in my area, right, who have pretty horrific views when it comes to race. You could call it racism. And they have the quote-unquote right to teach their kids to be racist. Do we respect those parents' rights in school? Do we respect their racist teachings? Or do our schools teach that racism is fundamentally wrong and not allow for the discourse of racial superiority to dictate how kids behave or how kids get to participate? Do we set up schools as a space for the development of a healthy democratic society, or do we give the parental rights of those parents because of their backward-ass, exploitive, horrific, violent policies or violent beliefs? Do we allow them to dictate to the rest of us how our kids should learn? Does their decision to be racist and teach their kids to be racist at home, does that give them the right to say we have to teach our kids to be racist too? Do they have, because they have the right to be abusive at home, quote unquote, right, does that mean that they get to tell our kids that they should accept abuse? No. It's just like with this labor, this with this labor thing is the same thing. Because you might have some parents out there who think it's personally fine to take 14, 15, 16, 17-year-olds, right, send them into bars, in some cases working as late as 2 a.m. And if I believe this is the one policy, maybe that might be the Arkansas policy. The 2 a.m. serving alcohol in establishments where, guess what? When people are in bars, especially like adults and gross, creepy old men, drink too much, and now you're going to put a 16-year-old in there feeding them that beer? How is that protecting the children that you're so concerned about? It's not. The reasons that we take our kids out of, or have historically, the reason why we roll back child labor laws, because guess what? Children were dying. They were being killed and maimed. And in Pennsylvania, of all places, we better damn well remember that history. Remember the Breaker Boys. The kids that were sent into the coal shaft to separate out the rocks and the coal. Some of them getting sucked down there. The ones that were responsible for trying to kind of hold open the door for the coal carts to come through. And very often the spring was so heavy that sometimes those kids lost parts of their arm or their hands. The March of the Children that came out of Philadelphia, right, out of the textile mills. because those children were forced to work long hours, kind of inhaling things that was going to destroy their lungs and respiratory systems for the rest of their lives. We said no. We said democracy requires education, and we want to make sure that all these kids have an education. And we want to make sure that these kids are not just going to be sent to their doom. We believe that they have the right to live. A shot. Right? That's why this stuff, I mean, I swear to God, you scratch at the surface, right, about what this kind of like parental rights nonsense is all about, right? And you start posing these kind of scenarios. Well, what do you mean? What are you talking about here? Just because you as a parent have a say in your child's education does not mean you get to dictate to the rest of us. And matter of fact, to flip that around, just because some loudmouth is showing up to up to these meetings or is on a school board saying that we have parental rights, right? Doesn't mean that we have to accept of their view of what public schools should be, of what our institution should be, what our laws should be. We can recognize them as the dinosaurs and Neanderthals that they are. Okay. We hear it. You want to be racist. Gotcha. Sorry, this is a democratic society in which racism, we want to eliminate racism. We want to respect the humanity of every kid. Right? You believe that God has there's only two genders and sexes, that everybody else should be destroyed or forced into some re-education camp? Okay, I hear that. That's some kind of crazy 1984 shit to me, but okay, that's your deal. That's not what we do here in the school. We respect everybody. We teach everybody. We make sure that there is space for this. And we are going to be constantly vigilant and critical about our histories to make sure that we don't inadvertently discriminate against somebody just because we don't understand. Just because they might have a different angle on things. No. This is I taught this class this semester, and it's not the first time I've taught it, but it's probably one of the best times I've taught it, I think. And, we talk about the rise of demagoguery, right? We talk about the difference between demagoguery and democracy. We read this book, we've had her on the show talking about her book, Patricia Roberts Miller. We've had her on this show talking about her book, Demagoguery and Democracy, right? And there's a big difference, right? There's one thing we always got to get wrap our heads around. Like, there's this weird kind of like slippery slope, if you will. It's not the right word for it, but it's kind of like we get ourselves in kind of like intellectual binds by saying things like, well, we have to be accepting of everybody, right? We have to respect everybody, right? Everybody's got the right to their own opinion, all that other kind of stuff, right? But then we start have opinions that are really problematic, like very racist ones, very violent ones, very kind of like believes that we should send our kids back to the mills, all those other kinds of stuff, right? That would roll back the gains, the democratic gains that people have fought for, right? And there's this kind of liberal tendency to then say like, oh, well, I guess they have an opinion too. And so then how do we accommodate that? That is not it. That is the wrong thing. There's a difference. Look, here's the difference, right? Say, for example, I might just take the issue of trans kids, right? Is that there could be a parent who could legitimately find out what's happening, right? Or hear about kind of like transsexualism, right? And hear about kind of like kids like kind of being trans, and legitimately not understand that perspective, not understand where that comes from, and be concerned about it, right? That concern, right? That lack of understanding, that kind of like thing that is jarring, that doesn't fit with your worldview. That's a legitimate feeling, right? But then what happens with that feeling is the important part, right? The one line, the Democratic, and I don't mean Democratic Party, I'm talking about democracy, right? The way we handle that in a democracy, right, is we pause and we try to understand, right? We recognize our own reaction as our reaction. And we recognize that there is something that we are unfamiliar with. And so we try to learn about it, try to understand it, right? And we listen to people like experts. We listen to the history. We listen to those discussions to try to understand what's happening here. Right? If you ever listen to parents who have trans kids talk about their own internal processes, right? I should say those parents who have accepted their trans kids, right? Or have gone through that, right? Or who are now advocates for their kids. They talk about coming to terms with this, right? And coming to terms with it doesn't mean to say like, accepting something you disagree with, but just kind of like being kind of taken by surprise by something that it was not in their worldview. And then helping to understand it. And what allows them so often to do that work of working to understand, working to try to really make sure. Because look, if you're a parent who has no idea about kind of how that stuff works, right? Why is it trans? If you think you might worry, is the kid have, the kid have having issues with their mental health, right? Do they need to get help? Is it a psychological issue or something like this that we need to kind of like work on this? Did something happen to them that, those are things that go through parents' minds. And that's also all legitimate kind of concerns to have, which is why you seek out people to talk to them, right? People who know better than you do about it. And that's what those parents do. And they do the work because they love their kids, right? They do the work because they want that relationship with their kid more than ever. They do the work because they recognize the most important thing to do is to maintain that solid relationship, that loving relationship. And it might be emotionally painful for them because depending on whatever their kind of like personal convictions or commitments or religious backgrounds are and things like that, it might be that, it might be difficult for them if that goes along, but they get through it because they love their kid. Right now, I think it's a bit kind of idealistic to believe that we could somehow kind of love our neighbors in that way, right? Love people, the famous line from like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez during the Bernie campaign, right? Are you willing to fight for someone you don't know? Right? I think it's a little bit idealistic to believe that we're all just going to get there, tomorrow. But there is a certain degree of that, a kind of a more, if you want to call it like a secular is the wrong word, but something that's a little bit more generalizable than just kind of, your kid, loving your kid. But that attitude of saying, we have things that come up that we're having a reaction to basically own our own reactions, to try to understand where the reaction is coming from. And then to care enough about, if we're talking about schools, the kids, right? Talking about these labor laws, these kids, to understand where they're coming from, understand the context around it, and making sure that we're doing the best that we can to foster this kind of like environment of democracy and growth and freedom and all this other kind of stuff, right? I mean, it's pretty straightforward. But this kind of mental gymnastics that happens sometimes is that you believe that you have to tolerate everybody. So the difference is, what I just was going through there is this democratic impulse, right? The impulse of democracy is to try to understand because you want to make sure that people are taken care of, that they're kind of included, right? And that we have the opportunity to grow ourselves, right? On the other side of things, like you have the anti-trans stuff, right? If you're in the liberal framework, the liberal meaning kind of like, oh, everybody's got their own opinion and we'll agree to disagree and that kind of stuff. The other one is like, say, well, we have to respect their opinion too, because it's an opinion, right? Freedom of speech, blah, blah, blah. But the anti-trans person, right? What we're seeing in the kind of, in schools today Their goal is not simply to just say, well, no, I'm going to raise my kid in a different way. That's not their goal. The goal is to destroy the trans person. Right? The goal is suppression of other people. Right? We can argue about whether they even have the right to suppress and exploit or kind of abuse their own children. I certainly don't think that's okay. If they want to destroy their kids' psychological well-being, I guess it's within their parental rights. But that when they start to say, okay, this is me, now I want to destroy anyone. I want to suppress anyone who disagrees with me. That is an anti-democratic impulse. That is one that runs the line of demagoguery, not democracy. That's the distinction. Our schools should not foster discourses and practices that support demagoguery. They should do the ones that support democracy. So, anyways, that was a little tangent I didn't plan on going on today, but it's just really driving me crazy. Well, and that goes right into like what had happened here. The Freedom Foundation, right, is holding a conference in December this July. We're going to have to see if we can get somebody on to talk about the Freedom Foundation and that conference. I just want to flag it for people. I did kind of, I've mentioned this once already, but I just want to bring it up for you real quick. I had it flagged here, and then I managed to, here you go. So this Freedom Foundation, they're calling it the Teacher Freedom Summit, right? The title of it is Conquering Mountains in Denver, Colorado, right? And so this is kind of what it is. Now this is where we start getting into explicitly. God, that looks like explicitly anti-union stuff. So this is what it says. To prepare teachers to combat the radical political agenda of the teachers' unions, the Freedom Foundation is hosting a first-of-its-kind teachers conference July 10th through the 12th, 2023 in Denver for public school teachers around the country. Thanks to the generosity of the Freedom Foundation's amazing supporters, this groundbreaking conference will be an all expenses covered for public school teachers. Conference attendees will enjoy an amazing lineup of speakers and panels with airfare, hotel accommodations, and dinners all covered by the Freedom Foundation. Spots are filling up fast. Don't miss the opportunity to join teachers. If you are a public school teacher and want to participate, here's how you apply. They give you an application. And so what is going to be covered? Janus rights. Janus rights, the Supreme Court decision that took away unions' ability to collect agency fees, right? Which is basically like, like fair share dues, right? We've talked about that before. They say, quote, lie versus the truth about unions and their members, that unions tell their members, how to help your colleagues leave the union, learn about alternative options to joining a union, getting involved with your community, fighting for your curriculum, how to push back against CRT, sexually explicit material, and more, breakout sessions based on grade level, discuss issues relevant to your classroom, right? They can earn PD and CEC credits for this and meet like-minded teachers. So they're going all in. And I've been talking about this, right? I've been talking about this for the past year. This is the next stage, right? The next stage, I mean, again, this has never gone away. They're going after this. But if you remember, this is happening in Souderton right now. This is happening in the Souderton School District, where there has been a kind of a union alternative organization that has been formed, right? That's all framed in the language of freedom and teacher choice and all this stuff. But at its core is what it is an anti-union campaign, right? If you are involved with unions, again, we don't have union density in the way that we used to. There used to be, union, because when there were more people belonged to unions, there were more people who understood what this was, right? They could recognize the calling cards of the anti-union push, right? Of the bosses attempting to break unions so that they can control us more, right? I mean, that used to be more common knowledge, right? But here it is coming right at us. And so that's happening in the Souderton School District. And we've seen this kind of come up in some other school districts as well, which I'm not going to talk so much about quite yet. So this is something to pay attention to. So, I'm going to be looking around for if we get somebody to come on and talk about like who these people are, the Freedom Foundation, what this conference is all about, and what this agenda is. But just wanted to flag that for you. Okay. This week, big week of this week, PA House passed the bill that would add LGBTQ protections to the state's non-discrimination law. That's pretty awesome. Now again, this is, Josh Shapiro has already said that he'll sign it. It's passed the House. It is now going to go to the Senate. I should double check, I always do this. So like, PA, see if we give you. Yeah, there's it's as you would expect when, a bill like this gets passed and the supporters are going to say, look, they're still optimistic of going to the Senate. Now the Senate is still Republican controlled. Republicans have historically been against this bill. But, you never know. There's a shot. Depends on what kind of pressure is going to be brought forward. See if I give you a quick comment on it. So it says the measure now heads to the GOP-controlled Senate. This is from Penn Live. GOP-controlled Senate, with some proponents expressing optimism Tuesday that the bill could clear that chamber, as well as Governor Josh Shapiro has voiced support for the bill. Right? So this bill, it's called HB 300. It amends the Pennsylvania Human Relations Act, which governs the Pennsylvania Human Relations Commission, the body that investigates and adjudicates complaints of discrimination in housing, employment, public services. The commission can levy fines or refer cases to court for further resolution. In addition to race, religion, and other attributes listed in the current law, HB 300 would add sex, sexual orientation, gender identity, or expression to the list of the prohibited types of discrimination. Right? So we're going to see where it goes. Right? Now, some of these protections do exist within Pennsylvania, but it's pretty scattershot. There are some strong protections for LGBTQ rights and against LGBTQ discrimination, but it's like in particular municipalities or cities. This would actually make it across the entire Commonwealth. So it's a big deal. So you had Malcolm Kenyatta and Jessica Benham have been kind of out in front on this one and have been just phenomenal in their work, especially to get this through. And, look, everybody who got out there and voted, especially, people here in Bucks County who helped flip seats in the State House to make sure that this State House is now, it's been controlled by the Democratic Party for the first time in 15 years or something like this. And after this big, huge kind of right-wing takeover of the State House, and we saw the shenanigans that have been dominating our politics for the past decade, now we're at a point where we're getting to see the work to take that back. And now this is what we can do when you have Democratic control of the House. Does that mean that all these Democrats in the House are just like good people and they're all good? No, but we have to keep up the pressure, certainly. But this is also a perfect example of why elections matter, right? As I mentioned too as well, Moms for Liberty is holding her conference in Philadelphia this summer. We have to watch this one closely. Again, I think this is something we're going to be reaching out, looking for more guests to be really just hammering down who these people are, what Moms for Liberty is up to in the state, and so on. And I found this little thing, that the president of Thomas Jefferson Hospital, Mark Tykosinski, basically has for the past few years, he's been liking tweets that questioning the science behind COVID, questioning the vaccines, questioning masking, and basically most recently, or had liked a tweet that called gender reassignment surgery child mutilation. So what's interesting about this too as well is he's been criticized by the CEO of Thomas Jefferson Hospital, said he was really disappointed in President Mark Tykosinski's careless use of his Twitter account, where he liked this stuff. And he issued an apology. He said, I usually just do this just to bookmark it. Those 30 tweets that I liked this past year are about, COVID being bunk and all that stuff. I was just bookmarking it, right? It's my lack of understanding of how liking a tweet is implied endorsement, right? Because he does it with his person, he's got his full title of the hospital and all that kind of stuff, right? But here, this is the key part, right? So they talked to Jessa Lingle, right, who's an associate professor of communication and gender, sexuality, and women's studies at the University of Pennsylvania. She was quite critical of Ty Kosinski's response to being asked by the Inquirer if he thought transgender surgery was, quote, child mutilation. His answer should have been an unequivocal no, she said. Instead, he told the entire Inquirer, quote, this is not my clinical area of expertise. In general, any issue involving children should be referred to a clinical experts at children's hospitals who offer. That's just double talk. Lingle said, quote, you shouldn't need specialized understanding in pediatric care to recognize that trans-affirming care is simply part of healthcare and part of well-being, she said. It's not a radical stance to say that trans-affirming care is not mutilation to children or anybody. Right? Exactly. So here we go. President of a hospital is now in a little bit of a hot water. So I don't know. Good as far as I'm concerned. I'm glad that they shone a light on it. Last thing I want to mention today is that people may have seen this, is that Geoffrey Hinton is a trailblazer in artificial intelligence work. He worked for Google. He has basically just left Google so that he can speak out against what's happening with AI. He's been referred to as the godfather of AI. And it's nuanced, right? So it's like, let me just read you a little bit. This is from NBC News. So Geoffrey Hinton, a trailblazer in artificial intelligence, has joined the growing list of experts sharing their concern about the rapid advancement of artificial intelligence. The renowned computer scientist recently left his job at Google to speak openly about his worries about the technology and where he sees it going. Quote, it is hard to see how you can prevent the bad actors from using it for bad things, unquote, Hinton said in an interview with the New York Times. Hinton is worried that future versions of the technology pose a real threat to humanity. Quote, the idea that this stuff could actually get people, get smarter than people, a few people believe that, he said in the interview, but most thought it was way off. And I thought it was way off. I thought it was 30 or 50 years or even longer. Obviously, I no longer think that, unquote. He's now 75 and is most noted for the rapid development of a deep learning, which uses mathematical structures called neural networks to pull patterns out of massive data sets. Like other experts, he believes that a race between big tech to develop more powerful AI will only escalate the global race. And he tweeted on Monday morning that he felt that Google had acted responsibly. Of course, he's saying that. But now he's basically concerned, right? Tristan Harris, who's one of the founders of the Center for Humane Technology, he also went on to write, quote, this is Tristan Harris, what we want is an AI that enriches our lives, AI that works for people, that works for human benefit, that helping us cure cancer and is helping us find climate solutions, he said during an interview. We can do that. We can have the AI and research labs that's applied to specific applications and does advance in those areas. But when we're in an arms race to deploy AI to every human being on the planet as fast as possible, little testing as possible, that's not an equation that is going to end well, right? And that's the thing that leads me at least in the direction where every kind of dystopian science fiction ever when the machine takes over. But, the whole idea there is that you have even some of these major AI people that are coming out and saying, watch it, we're all going to die.
I'm glad the end of the world's working out well for someone.
Yeah, or to put it in the words of Chancellor Dan Greenstein, our future might look like this.
It's like being on this moving sidewalk, which doesn't stop.
Yeah, there you go. Moving sidewalk that doesn't stop. That's what I feel like I'm on right this moment. All right, everybody, that's going to do it for me today. Thank you for sticking with us. I hope you're going to enjoy some of the sunshine while it lasts. We'll see how long it lasts. And I look forward to talking to you soon. I want to remind you once again that this coming Monday at 7 p.m., I am welcoming Mark Engler to the show. Mark's a Philly-based writer and author of This Is an Uprising, How Nonviolent Revolt is Shaping the 21st Century. And we're going to be talking about his article, most recently published in Dissent, called Can Movements Keep Politicians from Inevitably Selling Out? Good question, timely, as we head on into major election season and organizing. All right, everybody, I'm going to call it a day and get to my grading, I guess. I hope you all doing well. I wish you a fantastic weekend. And the primaries are right around the corner, so fingers crossed. Let's keep it up. See ya!